Anti-Semitism is a linchpin that holds together multiple forms of hatred.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch in New York City.
When we see far-right groups talking about the Great Replacement theory, blaming immigrants for societal rules, there almost is always a thread connecting back to anti-Semitic myths. And it's why I've argued understanding these connections are crucial for us to effectively challenge and dismantle the many faces of bigotry we face today.
Racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, these expressions of hate seem almost impossible to suppress in parts of our culture. Sometimes they even get linked with patriotism and religious faith. It's important to understand where this comes from, but also to recognize where effective opposition to hate, including white nationalists and neo-Nazis, can come from. Civil rights strategist Eric K. Ward explores this question in a powerful film titled We've Been Here Before: What the Punk Scene Can Teach Us About White Supremacy Today. And Eric's back with us this week to discuss the answers. As we keep growing our library of extraordinary interviews, I want to make sure you're subscribed to the State of Belief podcast. Please visit stateofbelief.com/subscribe. You'll hear this episode in full, as well as recent interviews with Dr. Jamar Tisby, Rabbi Sharon Brous, Bishop William Barber, Dr. Anthea Butler, and Rob Reiner and Dan Partland talking about their new documentary, God and Country. It would really help us to have you subscribe, rate, and tell people you're close to all about what you're hearing. The State of Belief is made possible in great part by the generous support of our listeners. If you've made a donation, thank you for helping get these conversations heard by more people who need them. If you haven't pitched in yet, don't wait. Information on how to do that is available at stateofbelief.com, and you can find out more about the work of Interfaith Alliance and join us at interfaithalliance.org. And now to my guest. Eric Ward is Executive Vice President at Race Forward and has held prominent positions at so many places such as Western State Center, Southern Poverty Law Center, Ford Foundation, just to mention a few. And Eric comes with this deep expertise on hate movements, including anti-Semitism and the attacks on democracy that we are experiencing right now. But even better, he brings these effective strategies for defending human rights and values, and he has this unique insights in the time we find ourselves in. I'm so grateful to have Eric Ward back with us on The State of Belief. Eric, welcome.
Paul, it's really, I'm delighted to be back here with you. It's great to be talking to folks, and I hope this coming together, this sequel, this part 2, finds you well.
It finds me well, and even better now that we're together. And I want to say that the last time that we spoke, we never know what we're conveying to people and what people are going to take with us. And you said something at the last time we spoke on The State of Belief that I have incorporated into every major talk I've given. And you said, Paul, we're not here because we're losing. That's what they want us to think, that we're losing. We're here because we're winning. And because more people actually want a multiracial, multi-religious, multi-ethnic country. And, when I've told that to people and said that Eric Ward said this, you can see them sit up straighter. And you say, oh, you know what? We're on the right side here. And this is not doomed to failure, actually. And I just want to thank you for, having offered that at the time you did, because it has really changed people's mentality about this moment that we're in, which it doesn't change anything about how dire it is, but it does change the way that people feel about the opportunity for the future.
I'm into that. And I can imagine as people are listening to this episode, if they're at home or at work or in the middle of an errand, or hopefully taking a nice walk, though I would say listen to this after the walk. I imagine they're hearing you say that, Paul, and they're thinking to themselves, wait a minute, this is what winning looks like. And
Mm, mm,
it could be hard to understand, right? The pressure to try to psychologically to get the winning team to move towards defeatism is paramount to the authoritarian playbook. It their major goal, and so the truth is we are still winning. This is what winning looks like. This is not a 30-minute sitcom that gets tied up all nicely and we laugh off the consequences of what it means to move forward as a multiracial democracy together, right? Uh, uh, is very real, and there will be pressures to try to prevent that, to try to divide communities, to wedge communities around tensions, and uh, the real weakness here, Paul, is that we give in to this idea that we are losing and then start behaving in those manners. And sadly, we can look around the country today and see some of our leaders, some of our organizations, some of our movements, some of our communities buying the big lie of this defeat and acting in ways that may actually make that a reality.
mm.
It's a serious time.
Yeah, it's a serious time. And I'd love for you to, say a little bit more about that. Like, what is the time that we're in? I think it's really important for our listeners to understand that just the very broad perspective that, Eric brings to this this work about democracy building and the many different experiences that you had. And I want to get back into the movie that you've created with the punk scene, but also your
Yeah.
incredible work on anti-Semitism and other forms of hate. But how are you understanding this moment, given your, the fact that you are in so many communities simultaneously? How do we make sense of where we are um, in in this in this difficult time, but in the time that hopefully also has some potential?
Yeah. So, we'll take folks back a little bit. They may have heard this a little bit in our last conversation. So I will give kind of a abbreviated version. You know, the 1960s, particularly the civil rights movement of the 1960s, had a real significant impact on American life. Previous to that period, we lived in a society that was based completely on othering, right? We called it white supremacy, or this idea of white superiority, that white people were inherently superior and that Black people were inherently inferior, just based off of the color of people's skin. It was a form of racism that was brutal and divided society. There is this civil rights movement that comes along in the 1960s that challenges that narrative. It put forth another narrative. And the narrative is that, in fact, we can move forward as a single society where everyone can live, love, worship, and work free from fear and bigotry. That Black-led civil rights movement inspired others. It brought Protestants and Catholics and Jews, Muslims, and many others, right, to this idea, conservatives and liberals, right? People forget Charleston Heston was a conservative who was deeply supportive of the civil rights movement, as were some other conservatives. It built a broad-based movement. It basically told folks that there was actually space for all of us to move together, and that race and gender were not the primary ways that we needed to understand one another, that there were other identities that we also held in common as a nation and as a society. The civil rights movement is successful. It puts forward a counter vision to the dystopian white supremacist narrative of divide and fear. It brings forward a narrative of an inclusive democracy, a multiracial nation that is really grounded in opportunity and abundance.
Yeah.
Well, no good deed goes unpunished, Paul, right?
Yeah.
And so the backlash begins right away. And I don't have to say too much about that backlash. I used to, right? But I think after Charlottesville and January 6th in the nation's capital, mass shootings, the targeting of Jews at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, Latinos at a Walmart in El Paso, African-American shoppers in Buffalo, New York, Gilroy Garlic Festival. The list goes on. We can see, right, that those who are opposed to the idea of a multiracial nation, those who want to walk around with a dark rain cloud over their heads, only have a few tactics. The tactics are to terrify white people from joining that multiracial nation, right? Creating fear and anxiety by taking advantage of complicated issues in our society and using othering. It is by dividing the civil rights movement, and it's by terrorizing marginalized communities through hate violence and intimidation. Not altogether different than what we have seen in other countries, whether we're talking about the Sudan, we're talking about Israel, Palestine, we're talking about Northern Ireland, other places around the world. The truth is that what this white supremacist, white nationalist movement has come to understand is the only way they defeat this drive, this aspiration towards a multiracial society, is to turn us against one another, to intimidate us, to make us feel fearful, and to build anxiety, to make us afraid of the future, rather wanting to embrace it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And then we have, there are many forces right now. Whether you can point to the war in the Middle East, to immigration, to other forces that that lend themselves to this heightened opportunity, frankly, for white supremacists to say, look over there, look over there. This is the problem. This is the problem. Get activated, get scared. And, the operationalizing of fear, and not that sometimes fear is not unfounded. I mean, I think that there are many, Jews, Muslims, others who are LGBT people who are very fearful right now. And so they're trying to figure out, what is my response to that fear? And I think that, and we're seeing that come to play. And, I think one of the things that is worth repeating is some of your analysis around anti-Semitism, and how it plays into broader questions that are afflicting society. It was, your analysis, I think, is very helpful for those of us who continue. Anti-Semitism right now is debated, is being debated. Like, what's the real definition? Like, what's the definition that matters? But I think your analysis is really helpful in creating a broad lens of understanding how it's playing out in American politics right now.
Yes. So, let's go back to that civil rights movement, which is actually victorious. And that's probably an episode for another time. But I'm just going to make a provocative assertion. Despite the defeatist narrative that we have absorbed from the white nationalist movement in this country, the truth is that the civil rights movement in this country was successful. Again, not in the 30-minute sitcom where everything gets wrapped up nicely, but it actually established itself as a competing narrative. So imagine you're art segregationist, you believe in white nationalism, you believe in white supremacy, you believe in white superiority. How do you come to explain that you have lost and suffered one of your greatest political defeats from folks you see as inferior, and enter from stage right is this thing called anti-Semitism? There's lots of definitions out there being debated around anti-Semitism. I think they should be debated vigorously. But let's all just accept this. At its core, anti-Semitism is the hatred, fear, and discriminatory behavior towards Jews. And there's different aspects of anti-Semitism, right? But the anti-Semitism that white nationalists tap into, right? Because they don't create it, right? Hate groups don't come into our communities bringing anti-Semitism, or racism, or homophobia, or sexism, Islamophobia, transphobia. They simply organize the bigotry that already exists. So, like good organizers, they tap into what already exists. And that's why anti Semitic conspiracy theories come into play. And these anti Semitic conspiracy theories and their deep ties to other forms of bigotry are something we should all understand. Anti Semitism often positions Jews as scapegoats, blaming them for various societal issues, economic struggles, and political uncertainty. Sound familiar? It's more than just a prejudice against Jews. It presents them as powerful manipulators, controlling global agendas from the shadows. And it is that portrayal that actually allows other forms of hate to flourish. And I talk about this in my essay, Skin in the Game, how anti-Semitism animates white nationalism. How does it do it? Well, take a look at how immigrants, people of color, and other marginalized groups are often portrayed in these conspiracy theories, the Great Replacement theory being one of them. They're often seen as pawns, manipulated by so-called Jewish plots, right? And that is used to fuel racism, xenophobia, and bigotry against these communities. In my opinion, Paul, anti-Semitism is a linchpin that holds together multiple forms of hatred. When we see far-right groups talking about the Great Replacement theory, blaming immigrants for societal woes, there almost is always a thread connecting back to anti-Semitic myths. And it's why I've argued understanding these connections are crucial for us to effectively challenge and dismantle the many faces of bigotry we face today.
That is perfectly concise and compelling, and it's terrible on so many levels. The idea that there's no way that Black folk on their own could create a successful civil rights movement. It's like insulting on that level. Oh, it must be the Jews who are doing it. There's no way that immigrants could be organizing themselves and becoming successful parts of our society. Must be the Jews behind all of this. There's been lots of kind of very dark humor about like the Jewish organizing and like, oh, I didn't make that meeting. Like those would be some pretty intense meetings. But so I think that it's just really helpful. I think it's helpful right now because we are in a moment where everybody's looking around and say, who's the enemy? Where do I, and we forget that there is this long-standing, virulent strain in American society of white supremacy that has always been determined to keep power until it's only been wrested from them at certain moments. And we're in another one of those moments, certainly with white supremacy and Christian supremacy kind of joining hands and saying, actually, what it means to be a real Christian in America is a white, largely Protestant, although there's some Catholics in there, and you have to, definitely, hate LGBTQ people, and you have to, there's certain like all sorts of litmus tests for what it means to be a real Christian in America. And so, this is, it really is, it's a really helpful framework to understand, okay, now I get what we're dealing with, and part of the reason we're dealing with it is because of the success of the civil rights movement, which is also the greatest spiritual moment that America can point to. Although you could argue indigenous culture beforehand, the greatest spiritual moment of America is the witness by the men and women of the civil rights movement who showed a kind of Christianity which actually has been a lesson for the world, and they got it, incorporated from Gandhi. I mean, it's like we have so many great resources. I think is the one of the messages here, that we are not in a deprivation moment. Actually, it's a moment to go deep into our resources that can inspire us. Up next, more with Eric Ward from Race Forward. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. You'll also find links to topics we discussed this week, as well as transcripts and more. And make sure you subscribe at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet. Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President, Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch. My guest is Eric K. Ward. His film is titled We've Been Here Before: What the Punk Scene Can Teach Us About White Supremacy Today. You are many things, and it's one of the greatest joys of getting to know you. And you have a film, and I'm trying to figure out how people can access it, because it's so good, and I want to make sure that people get a chance to access it. But I'll mention the name. It's called We've Been Here Before: What the Punk Scene Can Teach Us About White Supremacy Today. And this is part of your history. I mean, a lot of us, we kind of, we go in and we go to, we do our college, and then we go and try to, get a graduate degree, and then we go into the work. Part of your training was being in the punk scene, I think around LA, right? Do I have that right?
LA, West Coast. So LA,
West Coast, yeah.
Eugene, Seattle, and then the folks in Chicago and Portland, Oregon, who were kind enough to adopt me, right? Those were.
But talk a little bit about
me.
I think everybody's very more so celebrating you. But talk a little bit about this, because I actually think there are many folks who would never think to look to the punk. First of all, if they look at punk, sometimes they think of it as there is this neo-Nazi tradition, but actually it's not the dominant tradition within punk music, and music is really important. And I just want to offer you the opportunity, first of all, to talk a little bit about that moment, and also talk a little bit about this film that has been created.
So there's a filmmaker out there. His name is Jacob Kornbluth. He's a phenomenal filmmaker. Incredible
filmmaker.
And incredible, right? Has done some phenomenal pieces on economic inequality and others. So he reaches out to me, and lots of filmmakers have reached out to me. But he reached out with an intriguing question. He had seen some testimony I had given to the U.S. Senate, and it involved taking a look at anti-Semitism. So he asked me, he wanted to do something, and he said, "Where did you come up with this analysis?" And I was in one of those moods, like now, I was drinking a lot of coffee, and I said, I put back, I said, if you want to know where I got this analysis on anti-Semitism, why don't you bring up your film crew, and I'll introduce you to the punk scene I came up in, because we had to take on anti-Semitism before we even knew it was anti-Semitism that we were dealing with, and this was happening in the 80s and 90s. Well, I didn't expect him to take up the challenge, but he did. And he showed up with his film crew, and we spent 2 days in Oregon talking to some of my friends about our experience, which is this. For those who don't know, Moment Magazine does an interview a couple of issues back called "The Courage of Eric Ward." I don't know if it's about courage, but it is a good look at my growing up. I grew up in LA in the midst of desegregation. We were bused to schools across town, right, into these integrated new public schools. Our parents didn't know what to do with it. And most of us were latchkey kids, and we were Gen X. So our parents were hands off, not like they are today. And so we were left to our own devices. The truth is, Paul, we were never going to bond across lines of race, right? We had grown up in real segregated society. And society is still segregated today, but legally it's not supposed to be. What I remind folks is I grew up in a time where legal segregation, right, was defended, was the way of the land, and then it went away. So we weren't going to get along. We weren't going to bond. But look, we're middle school students. We're high school students. The one thing you want to do at that age, right, is belong and find meaning. And so luckily for us, the two things appeared, hip hop and punk. Now, I'm old enough that we didn't know the difference, right? We would go see Fishbone and Run DMC at the same show, right? Grandmaster Flash and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Yes, the Red Hot Chili Peppers used to be a punk band. They probably still consider themselves in that genre. And so we would go see all of these bands. And that environment, that subculture, created a new competing identity. I'm not saying it was as strong as the systemic challenges of race and gender and sexual orientation and class in our society, but it gave us an anchor. And that's really where a bunch of us kind of found ourselves, right? We didn't care that we were Asian or Latino or white or rich or poor. We cared, right? What kind of bands you liked and what clubs you went to and what part of the punk scene you were about. That's what mattered to us, and we really threw our hearts into it. The story that Jake tells in this Jacob Kornbluth, and we've been here before, what the punk scene can teach us about white supremacy is simply this. It is a piece that examines what happens when white power punk rockers who end up becoming neo-Nazi skinheads begin to infiltrate the punk scene in the early 80s, and the choices and the choiceless choices that it left for many of us who had no other home, no other place to go back to. And some of us across the country in different cities chose to stand up for the only place we could call home. And at the time, we didn't understand that what we were fighting was a narrative called anti-Semitism that was fueling this invasion of the punk scene. And so we unpack this in this story. We unpack it through my voice and the voice of others. And we draw out some of the larger lessons. What happened in the punk scenes, in those clubs in the 1980s, is what's happening on a mass scale now here in the United States. And some of these lessons are relevant. We also explore some of the negative impacts, right? We were kids. We weren't angels. And so when people threw punches at us, when they used physical violence, and there was no one to protect us, some of us chose physical violence as a response. And we talk about the negative consequences of not having other choices. We didn't have organizers. We didn't have institutions like these white power activists did coming to their aid. We were left to our own devices. And we talk about some of the long-term trauma and impact of those moments. But it's an inspiring story. We've been holding test screenings around the country. The documentary, folks can stop trying to Google it right now. You won't find it online.
Well, I can be a testimony to that. I mean, I'm like, so how do you have to organize a screening? We have to bring Eric Ward to our town. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So look, if you want to see it, you have to reach out to us. It's an event. It's
I
not
like it.
just a film screening, and we only want to do between 75 and 250 people. We'd be happy to consider bringing it and the conversation and the happening anywhere around the country. People have loved it. They have been inspired, reinvigorated. Punk rockers and others, they have been really just magically powerful coming together.
So now we're gonna bring you to. This is on my agenda now. So, but I do. Where can people reach out? Like, what is the? There's a website. What's the best way to reach out to bring it to their hometown?
What I would say is the film was supported by Reboot Films. So you can be in touch with Reboot Films, or you can find myself, Bulldog Shadow on Twitter, or Eric Ward on LinkedIn. You can find Jacob Kornbluth. Just be in touch with us. It really is DIY. We're going to make you work a little bit to
excellent.
See if you really want this in your community. But if folks want it bad enough, we'd love to work with you to make it happen. It is a powerful moment.
It sounds amazing. And the thing that it makes me think about is, like, where is that happening today without us knowing about it? I mean, I think there's so many cool moments, movements that are happening, among young people today that are like creating opportunities for organizing that sometimes, fogies like me, I won't put you in my category, but fogies like me might be missing it because I'm not there. And I don't know. How old are you? I'm six. I'm almost 60.
I'm old. Look. I saw my first punk show, right, in 1979, 1980. That's how old I am.
Okay.
So folks can do the math.
We can do the math. Yeah. Okay.
But I should put some container around that so folks don't go too wild. I did sneak out of my house, by the way. So I had to sneak out of my house to go to those shows, because I don't want folks thinking, wow, he's like as old as Moses.
No. He's not. I'm looking at it. He's not old as Moses. So I want to you also have an opportunity to talk a little bit about Race Forward. You all are having a conference in St. Louis in November, and are there what are ways that people also could connect to you through your work at Race Forward and maybe just a mandate about like what we should all be really. Your suggestion for how we might best meet this moment.
Yeah. So let's go back to something you said earlier, Paul, because I thought it was very insightful. You have this white nationalist movement that is trying to co-opt and has at times, right, co-opted Christianity, and we call it white Christian nationalism. Folks may have heard this term, right? It's an attempt to corrupt Christianity, right? It is. I'm not going to get all preachy, right? But if we were having a long theological discourse, I'd be talking to you about the corruption of Christianity, the idea of making it a vehicle for inequality, bigotry, right? Violence is the spirit of the Antichrist, right? And we could break that down. But the piece around that we should understand is that those attempts have real consequences on people's lives in terms of their health care, in terms of their housing, in terms of their transportation. It's not just an interesting, conversation. People suffer from those attempts. And here's the thing before I get to Race Forward, because it connects, right? The film, Race Forward, and other projects that I'm involved in. The one thing that I know, as I said about the white nationalist movement, is that it wants to divide us, and it will do anything it can to divide communities, because divided communities mean that we cannot build the power and the aspiration to stand against this kind of white nationalist onslaught on democracy. But I know a second thing too. The second thing is that the white nationalist movement individually wants us to feel isolated, alienated, and scared, like a horror film, right? In a horror film, folks first mostly go off to do something nice together, right? Friends or family, moving into a new home, right? Going out to the woods, going to a show, right? That's the basis of a horror film. And then things go terribly wrong. And what does the monster do the entire film? Try to separate people, to make them go their own ways, right? To argue, to break down trust. That is, I just now broke the narrative and plot line of every horror film, but there you go. Well, that's what the white nationalist movement is doing now. And so the work that I do, whether it's We've Been Here Before or Race Forward or a host of other projects, are about finding ways for people to not be alienated. And it doesn't just have to be politics, though don't ignore politics, right? We have other identities. We are quilters, right? We are long distance runners. We ride Harleys. We go to shows or play music, right? We are gamers. We cosplay, whatever it is, right? What I want folks to understand is, just like Christianity, those fandom and subcultural spaces are also under attack. That's because the white nationalist movement and authoritarians are cynical. They'll use anything. I have been around long enough in this work to understand. I have watched the white nationalist movement try to co-opt paganism, right? I have watched them try to co-opt Hinduism. I have watched them try to co-opt Celtic religions, right? And Christianity is the one they keep coming back to because they know we are most vulnerable, right, around our faith right now. And so finding ways of not allowing the white nationalist movement to isolate us is also how we protect the fandoms, the subcultures, and the sub-communities that hold so much meaning in our life. Race Forward believes this as well. And it fundamentally believes that racism and racial inequality creates separation in our society that prevents us from bridging as human beings, right? As Americans, as communities each and every day. And so Race Forward holds a biannual conference. It's called Facing Race. It will be in St. Louis in November. Folks can visit Facing Race online to learn more about the conference. But it is the largest gathering. It is the town hall on racial justice in the country, meaning it is a big spectrum of folks. You will find abolitionists. You will find folks who disagree with abolition. You will find folks who work in government, folks who work in community. It is where we come together as a community committed to racial justice, to debate, to disagree, but to understand at the end of the day, all of us seek to live in that society where racism is no longer a barrier in our lives. And that doesn't matter whether you are a 78-year-old white male veteran living in rural Iowa who's facing discrimination, right, because of your age and because of your veteran status, right, or a 17-year-old trans Latina trying to find a job in Portland, Oregon, who's facing also job discrimination and because of age or because of gender. As I said before, all of us have that fundamental right to opportunity, to aspire to a better life in our society. And Race Forward seeks to address the largest linchpin, racism. Imagine as a kid, if racism hadn't been a factor, there probably how vibrant that punk scene could have been. And so whether you're in a fandom or subculture, whether you work in government, whether you work in nonprofits, business, right, Facing Race is the space for you if you understand fundamentally that racial inequality stymies the culture, the fandom, the community that you love most.
Well, I'm going to add religion to that because my guess is that you have
Amen.
religious folks too, and
Yes, we do.
it sounds like an amazing a conference. This is in Facing Race. It's in St. Louis in November. There's just a few other things happening in November, so it shouldn't be
Yes.
shouldn't be a big moment at all in our national psyche. So that'll be pretty amazing. I want to end like we always do by offering you the opportunity to tell us what gives you hope right now.
Yeah. You know what gives me hope right now? So we're in a moment, Paul. This is not going to sound hopeful, just like we're winning doesn't look like we're winning. We're in a moment right now where all of us, right? Not just white nationalists, not just authoritarians, are absorbing the big lie, right? We believe that we need to pit ourselves against one another, that we need to divide and undercut our own civil rights movement, right? Rising record level Islamophobic and anti-Semitic hate violence in our country happening right now. And the truth is, right, it's not coming from the white nationalist movement. We're absorbing some of these tendencies, and instead of resisting them, our fear, right, and the horror of this white nationalist onslaught on our country, along with COVID and climate disaster, has really divided us. But here's what gives me hope. Even in the midst of that, at a time when the world isn't being kind, there is still kindness in the world. And I see it in some of our leaders today. And those leaders are practicing humanity and empathy, right? They are committing to anti-hate principles that reject anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia, and other forms of bigotry. They have no place for it in discourse. They are committed to nonviolent protest and advocacy, and they understand that while there are systems of oppression, right, that there are disparities in power, that our job isn't really to point them out, but to bring dialogue and solutions, right, by those affected, those most marginalized in our society. And that brings me a lot of hope, right? And, whether we're talking about a Wajahat Ali or Sharon Browse, the list goes on. They're just phenomenal. I'm not going to start naming names because I need to go on for an hour, but there are really some phenomenal leaders. And it is tough to be that type of leader in these sectarian moments. And so I'm hopeful, right, that these leaders get the support and encouragement that they need right now. The last thing that gives me hope in this moment is there is a phenomenal punk band. So I'm just going to throw their name out, Indigenous Native American band out of Portland called 1876. And they are the best thing about punk that I have heard in over a decade. They are phenomenal. So I'm going to give them a little love shout out there. Book them too. Check them out. But they give me a lot of hope about what the future can look like. And it is an inclusive one. We simply don't give up the win. That's the job in front of us. And that's what gives me hope for bands and leaders who are not giving up the win.
The film from Reboot Ideas is titled We've Been Here Before, What the Punk Scene Can Teach Us About White Supremacy Today. It's from Emmy Award winner Jacob Kornbluth and civil rights strategist Eric Ward, who is also the executive vice president at Race Forward, who is building power in communities and bridging connections to effective policy change. And I would say so much more. Eric, thank you for all that you're doing. And thank you for spending this time with all of us here at The State of Belief.
Appreciate you, Paul. Always.
Please be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform, or at stateofbelief.com/subscribe. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief. Become a partner in this crucial work with a financial contribution today. Information on how to donate is available at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. And share what you're getting out of this show with the people in your networks. Let's get more people listening and keep these conversations going on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Threads. Look for the handle at State of Belief. The news and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. The State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.